We had another spot interview of NeverEndingPanel.com with special guest Miss Kalendar, BrassNeedles.com. Up for, I understand, 2 Parsec Awards, which we are going to call Parsecs.
Parsecki.
Parseconds, I thought.
Parseconds.
I like the Parsecki.
I like the Parsecs because it's got the X in it. No, I'm just kidding. And the Parsec Award is for podcasting, and Miss Kalendar is a podcaster of some renowned, thousands of listeners in a very short while.
Voice only.
What's that?
Voice only.
Voice only.
I think people will know what podcast is
people,
if they're watching a vidcast.
If they're watching a vidcast, they might only be in the vidcast. They might not actually go.
Right, they might only be in the vidcast, but they would know what a podcast is.
There's a small, tiny possibility.
There's like nobody on the planet who doesn't know what a podcast is.
Who does vidcast? You're saying there's no one.
Anybody watching this right now is going to know what a podcast is, and I'd put money down on that. They're watching the vidcast.
Okay, if anybody out there doesn't know what a podcast was before we said so, please inform us at neverendingpanel.com.
Dude, you're so going to lose this bet.
I just need one.
One person
just need one.
Watching a vidcast wouldn't know what a podcast is.
Just need one.
Okay, anyways.
Well, if they'd like to know what a podcast is, they can listen to mine.
That's right.
Which
is BrassNeedles.com.
Yep.
So, you have like the best tagline ever for a podcast.
It's really long.
It's long, but it's brilliant. Can you please tell our audience what that tagline is?
That tagline is, because it is a knitting and science fiction podcast,
yes.
There's a lot of crossover, believe it or not.
Crossover, get it?
Crossover.
Knitting.
Oh, knitting?
Knitting, crossover.
I'm speechless.
That's why I make the medium bucks.
And now, time for the tagline.
The medium bucks.
Now, time for the tagline.
The tagline is...
Tagline! Tagline!
Tagline!
No.
It was
yeah,
dramatic. So it's, the next time someone makes fun of you for knitting in public, just laugh, because after the zombie apocalypse, you'll have a useful skill, and they'll just be food.
I love
it. The tagline.
Who's going to make the clothes after the zombies attack?
That's
yes,
true.
absolutely.
I am.
Socks.
And the socks.
Miss Kalendar will be making the clothes after the zombies attack.
Get your orders in now.
Of course, if they're fast zombies, it'll probably be very quickly knitted.
Knitted on the run.
Knitted on the run. Running and knitting.
I could do that.
Never run with knitting pin thingies.
Unless it's into the brain of a zombie.
Unless it's into the brain. Unless you're running from zombies.
I think we all saw Halloween. Just
yes, that's correct. Tweak, tweak, tweak. Anyways, so how on earth did you manage to combine these two things and say, well, that's going to go. I'm going to just do a show on knitting and science fiction. Where, how, why?
Well, it was probably just a bad idea at the time.
A bad idea?
I like bad ideas.
And then, my boyfriend...
Bad idea doing so well that it's successful.
We know her boyfriend?
You do?
She has a boyfriend?
Not biblically, mind you.
Right.
Well, maybe you. You've known him longer.
You have known him for a
That
million
is such
years.
a disturbing thought, I must say. Ooh.
Well, he enabled me, because he's a total world-class enabler, and bought me a microphone, and I said, well, now I have to do it.
Right. A very nice microphone. We've been on her show.
It's one of those floating microphones.
It's a floating
Pound the
microphone.
table and everything.
It's sci-fi, it floats.
It floats. So, knitting and sci-fi. Where, how, why, and it seems to have actually caught on.
Oh, it has.
You've been nominated for 2 Parsecki.
I have.
We said that already.
Which was a great big surprise for me. I had no idea they were going to do that. So the thing about science fiction and knitting is that there's a huge fandom of sci-fi geeks that love to knit and like to knit things from movies or from TV shows. You know the Jane hat?
Ah, yes.
Oh, that must be a popular.
I love
Tons of people
the
knit
Jane
that
hat.
constantly.
I want a Jane hat.
I will knit you a Jane hat.
From Firefly, for those who don't know.
It's for Firefly.
And you heard her promise. She's going to knit me a Jane hat.
I will knit you a Jane
Awesome.
hat.
Everybody knows what Firefly is.
In fact, if you put it out there, you might have a fan offer to make you one as well.
Wow.
And like the new Star Trek movie, Scotty's hat,
No, I want a Jane hat.
Oh, yeah.
they make that one. I mean, there's
It's
whole boards full of
happens to be a
fandoms.
very good point. That a big part of science fiction is, I guess, what you call cosplay. Is with costuming and
The
obviously
Doctor Who scarf.
the Doctor Who scarf.
The Doctor Who scarf.
So actually, it makes
Fourth
perfect
Doctor.
sense that you're actually grabbing the audience that's really into the craft of making and building things and are passionate about science fiction itself.
Exactly.
How do you decide, with your show, like, do you devote a certain percentage of it to knitting and then a certain percentage to science fiction? Like, how do you break it up?
It's pretty much the first 5 to 7 minutes, maybe 10, is knitting and spinning, because I hand spin yarn, and crafting, and then the rest of the half hour is all sci-fi. Usually Star Trek, because I'm a Star Trek nerd.
Okay.
But
She said,
yeah, I'm a Star Trek nerd.
We'll introduce
my
you to
name
Jane.
is Miss Kalendar and I'm a Star Trek nerd. Yeah.
I really
Do you
am.
guys have like a 12-step program? Just kidding.
No, because none of us want to be healed. Don't heal me. I like
Don't
self-display.
heal me.
The curse is the cure. The
So,
curse is the cure.
When you say the first part is about knitting and all of that, so in other words, you're saying essentially hey, this is how you would make A, or I started working on and I wanted to share with you? What
it's
is
more, I'm working on this, out of this. And this is probably, I don't know how far this will go for the people who aren't crafters watching, but when you make something and you're talking to a lot of other people, even though it's a physical media that you're working on, and they can't see it, they can only hear you, they can all understand what you're doing.
Got it.
They all understand, they know what it's like, they can imagine themselves working on it, and with knitters, a lot of the patterns are very popular, so a lot of the knitters make the same thing, and they think, oh, I know what that yarn she's using, I've made that pattern, that's a nice sort of mix. Maybe I'll try that next time.
Got it. And so presumably people are writing in and sharing their ideas for if you say this is what I'm doing, they're going to write back in, or they're going to, I don't know, do you pod in? You know,
they write in. I have
Right.
boards, and there's
Gotcha.
comments on the.
Is there like instant
podcast
feedback, or do you just check it out afterwards?
I check it, every 3 or 4 or 5, 7 times a day.
Right.
And well, you know what? There's a ton of knitting podcasts out there. Just in general, just for knitting,
I
and
don't
they
think
talk about knitting all day.
But I don't think there are any knitting in science fiction.
Well, there's mine.
That's right. I'm saying that you have carved out.
You've got that market cornered.
I did.
Cornered,
This is the corner of the market.
Right.
Here's me.
And there's she.
Right there.
Now, I know Eitan had a question he was dying to ask you.
Well, here's the thing. I go ahead and I actually, it's
Darn!
not really a form of knitting, but I actually make my own chainmail.
Which is
I
awesome.
always used to consider, knitting with steel, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd wrap the dowels and so on, and I'd wrap it with the wire and then cut everything. So would that actually be something that I could bring up on your show, knitting with chainmail, creating my own chainmail? Would that be something that would be this little thing?
I wouldn't call it knitting because it's not technically knitting, and people do knit
It does
with
use
wire. People do actually knit with
It doesn't
wire.
use needles. It does use pliers.
But you can totally bring it up. I'm all about crafting. I am not a knit Nazi, as they call it.
You're not a yarnist?
I'm not a
knit
yarnist.
Nazi.
I'm not a knitist.
A knitist.
Not a
I
knitist.
appreciate all
nitwit.
crafters.
Ah.
They've got to be nitwits.
I might be
But
first.
Donnie had another question he really wanted to ask you, but it was kind of obscure.
What was this?
Who played the 1957 linebacker for the Chicago Bears?
What?
I don't. That was just a question I was dying to ask you.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Larry Niven?
That's what it's like.
that's right. You
See?
win.
That's what it's like. Not fun, is it?
No, it's not.
No, it's
I
not.
don't know why you let me get away with it for so long.
Because it's fun.
Did you ask
It is
everyone
funny.
that, or
It
is
is
it just
fun.
me?
Yeah. What's that?
Did you ask everyone that, or is it just
No,
me?
No,
I
he
asked
just
anybody.
screws with me with
I
it.
always screw with Eitan.
Eitan had a question he really
But I-
wanted to ask you.
but I
I'm
feel-
about-
right.
and at that point, I'm like zoned out. I'm thinking about, I wonder what's in the green room.
I always wait for
tomorrow.
Eitan to I wait for the glassy look in his eyes, and as soon as I see the glassy look, I say,
It does
"Now
have
Eitan has
I'm
his
sitting there with
question
Charlie Strauss going, oh crap.
You need 2 cards.
No, we don't. It's funny this way.
This is why
Keeps me on
radio
my
is
toes.
easier, because I could just stop it and start it again anytime I want and cut stuff out, and people would never know, except for I don't edit.
Okay,
She
so
doesn't edit.
How often?
Remember, when you're seeing her podcast, she doesn't edit. It's all
And if
live.
you're seeing it, there's a big problem.
And in our last 30 seconds or so, how often do you have shows, and obviously brassneedles.com, but how often, like where, what, besides the website?
Often do podcast.
How
I
often do you
podcast every week.
Every week. So
Every
once a
week.
week
So
you
once
can
a week,
expect a
you're
show.
getting a new
Every
podcast.
week, about a half hour.
About a
I
half
think
an hour.
that's about all we have time for.
And that's about all we have time for.
I want to thank you for coming on the show.
You're quite welcome.
Ms. Kalendar, thank you for being on our show, Never Ending Panel.
Thank you for
Eitan,
having
Donnie.
me.
It's nice meeting you.
Whoever you are.
And that's a wrap.